You're listening to another episode of the Just Go Bike podcast, powered by RAGBRAI. This is the award-winning podcast where we are all about the culture of cycling, just for the fun of it. Your hosts are Murph from the Murphology podcast and AP from Parrot Talk. With tales from all over the nation, come for the bikes, stay for the fun, and leave with a smile. And now here is Murph.
Hey, that's me.
And AP.
Hey, that's me.
Hey there, AP.
Hi, Murph. What have you been up to?
Oh, well, a little of this, a little of that. I guess this morning it snowed, and it got me even more pumped up about an upcoming Christmas bike ride here in Cedar Rapids. It's basically everyone puts lights on their, well, most people are on their fat bikes. So I've gathered up my battery-operated holiday lights, and now the incredible task of putting them on the bike is ahead of me.
I can't wait to see how your bike looks with all the lights. It sounds awesome. So where do you ride?
It's a ride put on by a local club called Fat Bike Ventures, and they have a very short ride lined up, but it does include a group photo in front of the, you know how every town has their own like Christmas tree in the main square of downtown? Well, we have our lighted Christmas tree at Green Square Park, so we're going to be going there for a big old picture.
Ooh, awesome. Well, that sounds really, really fun. I will not be biking outside now that it is under 50 degrees, so I will be doing my trainer riding. And also took a little time to do some baking. I just made a big loaf of banana bread, and it was maybe one of the best loaves of banana bread that I've ever made.
Whoa.
Not to brag myself up. I mean, compared to my own previous attempts. And I do make banana bread pretty often. So,
well, and I will say it was kind of funny. We were talking on the phone yesterday, and I had banana bread in the oven at the very moment that I was talking to you, and you said you were making it. So,
yeah.
Twinsies.
So, twinsies. Important question. Do you put chocolate chips in your banana bread?
I put a few chocolate chips in, and I also put nuts in mine.
Oh, I hate nuts in bread. It's so so gross.
Okay, well, I guess
at least we align on the chocolate chips.
Yes. Okay. Well, so let's switch over to riding RAGBRAI. Okay. I think I've mentioned this to you when we have been on long rides together, but do you recall I have I have many favorite things, but two of my favorite things to see as we get close to a town?
A bar. And
yes.
One of them has to be the water tower.
Yes, you are correct. As soon as you see that water tower, even if it's like 2 or 3 miles away, you just know you're getting close, and it's kind of like something you can fixate on and be like, all right, I'm getting closer. I'm getting closer. I absolutely love it when I can see a water tower.
Yeah, unless, of course, it's a water tower for another town, which happens.
Yeah, and occasionally there are those, I don't know what they're called, but they're like rural water towers. They kind of fake us out because they're literally in the middle of nowhere. Like you'll see it and be like, oh my gosh, water tower. And then you get closer and it'll say rural something. And you're like, gosh darn it.
I know. So tricky. 100% been tricked by those before. And a couple other things that look like water towers, like silos. But so what is your other thing that you look forward to seeing when you ride into a town?
Okay. Well, can you guess?
Well, for me, it would be fire station. But what about like the welcome to sign? I know you stop and take pictures of those quite a bit.
Yes. It's actually well before the welcome to or the town sign. It's the reduced speed ahead sign. When I see that, I know that we are very, very close to town.
I think you've pointed one or two of those out to me before.
Oh, yeah. I mean, reduce speed ahead, that means it's time to get into town. It's time to find something to eat or drink or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. I just usually rely on you to tell me when we're getting close to town.
Well, on the show today, we have another first-time RAGBRAI rider, Diana Gray. She emailed us, and we just had to have her on. She has such a great story.
Yeah, I love hearing these rider stories, and I particularly love hearing from Diana.
Diana did the last 2 days of RAGBRAI this past year, RAGBRAI LI, and I think it's safe to say that she is now hooked.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking the people, the food, the countryside, and of course the biking too. She grew up near Iowa, kind of like Quad City area, and then moved away, but, came back.
Yep. RAGBRAI will pull you back in. I can't wait to hear the full interview.
All right, let's get to it. A very warm welcome to Diana. How are you doing, Diana?
I'm good, Murph. Thanks.
Good. It's always so fun to talk to people about their RAGBRAI experience because, everybody does RAGBRAI differently. So I'm so happy to have you on the podcast to kind of give us your story.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be on the podcast too because I really enjoy it. I enjoy your podcast a lot.
Thank you. Well, before we get into your RAGBRAI experience, will you tell the listeners maybe where you live and if there's a cycling culture or what it's like there?
Sure. So I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and have for about the past 40 years. I'm originally, though, from northwestern Illinois, up just south of the Quad Cities area on the Illinois side. Mm-hmm. So I'm very familiar with Iowa in general. It's kind of like my second home state, and very familiar with lots of people who've ridden RAGBRAI, and I've heard about it all through the years.
Yeah.
There has become a growing cycling culture, I would say, in St. Louis in the last, 10 to 15, 20 years maybe. And we have many more bike lanes now. And there's lots of groups that ride, and there's lots of meetup groups and so forth. I used to ride. I was just talking to my daughter about this, who's in town for Thanksgiving from New Orleans. Just talking to her about how I used to ride out of my neighborhood with a Tuesday night crew that rode the Riverfront Trail. We have a Riverfront Trail along St. Louis that goes up quite a ways up north. I don't know, it's about 15 miles maybe. And then you can cross over into Illinois and come back the other side if you want. Oh. And I used to do that almost every Tuesday during good cycling weather. But anyway, it eventually sort of fell apart. And so now I mostly ride on my own, just all around town. I have my own little routes. And Forest Park is a huge city park, here in St. Louis, bigger than Central Park in New York.
Oh, wow.
And it has a 7 or 6.5 mile trail around the perimeter of the park. So often, like on Saturday mornings, I'll ride up to what's called the Hill here from my neighborhood. The Hill is the Italian neighborhood. There's a coffee shop there that I go to on Saturday mornings often. Mm-hmm. I'll ride to there, and then I'll have my coffee and read the paper for a while. And then I set off for Forest Park, which isn't too far away. I'll ride around Forest Park, and then I ride back home. So I get in like maybe 15 to 20 miles in that sort of a ride. And I started doing that much more commonly when I knew I was going to be riding in RAGBRAI.
Yeah. And that sounds, really peaceful, that park, knowing that St. Louis, there's a lot of people that live in St. Louis, but to know that you have a place like Central Park, would you say it was called Forest Park?
Forest Park. It's called Forest Park. That's where the St. Louis Zoo is and the Art Museum.
Okay.
But it is a huge urban park that's very, very pastoral. It has 2 golf courses in it, and it has a whole forested portion actually still.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of native plantings and so forth. It's lovely. And a skating rink, an ice skating rink in the winter and so forth.
Wow. It's like a one-stop shop.
It is. It's great. And the St. Louis Science Center is partially based in the park. Anyway, there's lots of stuff. The History Museum is based there. Yeah.
Nice. Well, you said you had, kind of an Iowa connection because you were near the Quad Cities, which I'm sure everybody knows the Quad Cities. It's basically 4 communities, 2 in Illinois, 2 in Iowa that meet right at the river. So did you ever think about riding RAGBRAI as you were growing up, or did you ever hear about it?
You know what? I'm old enough that RAGBRAI wasn't really around when I was growing up per se. Mm-hmm. Only like during my college days, I think, did RAGBRAI start. And, it really wasn't very well known, right, for a few years. But then once it took off, then I started hearing a lot about it from my friends back home and people who used to run like in the Big Spiderbeck Festival and race and stuff in Davenport. they would talk about, oh no, RAGBRAI's coming through this year at the same time as the Bix. This is going to be a big problem with all the people. So stuff like that. Yeah. And then I heard more and more about it as after I moved to St. Louis. And I always thought it sounded like fun. Actually, somebody I used to ride with on the Tuesday night crew out of here was from Iowa, and he had done RAGBRAI many times, he and his wife, but they always did it very rustically. This is where I got my impression that, you had to carry your tent, carry your sleeping bags, carry all your food, and like set up this camp every night. And I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that.
Meaning all of it on your bike?
On their bikes.
Oh,
they took everything, yes, themselves. And I didn't even know there was an option until I did it this year for both, the RAGBRAI team per se, carrying your gear, or signing up for a charter. So.
Yeah. That's funny. I've done RAGBRAI, every which way. And some of my most favorite years are when I did take everything on my bike, and I would leave from my front door here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and we would pedal, to the RAGBRAI start and then pedal all of RAGBRAI. So I'd be at I don't know, maybe 11 days of carrying all my crap. I mean, now I look back, I'm like, why? And I always
you were young.
Yeah, or just dumb. I don't know. But the best part too is you get home and you're like, ugh, gross laundry. It's been sitting in these bags forever. But then I would always get a kick out of, or kick myself, as to how much stuff was in those bags that I never touched, never looked at. Probably another 5, 6, 7 pounds of junk that I didn't need, but
you didn't have to carry all the way across Iowa.
Yes, yeah, but oh well, I did anyway. So okay, so you kind of hinted at this, but my next question is, how many RAGBRAIs have you done?
Well, this was my first.
Oh my gosh.
This was my first this past summer, and I only did a portion of it because I did have to work in the middle of that week. I actually considered at the beginning, though, when I was signing up, I think I'll come up for the expo and ride 2 days of RAGBRAI. Then I'll drive back to St. Louis, work for a couple of days. Then I'll drive up to Ottumwa and join again. But the more I thought about it, I thought, oh, that's craziness. No, because the start city is much farther from St. Louis than Ottumwa is. And so it was going to be a lot of driving back and forth if I was going to do that. And how was I going to get my car where it needed to be? Yeah. It was just too complicated. So I abandoned that idea, but I rode the last 2 days of RAGBRAI.
Okay. And I'm going to just guess that you had a wonderful experience because you made the effort to email us and you're on this podcast. So I'm crossing my fingers that that's true.
That is absolutely true. I have told many people that it was one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life.
Oh, that's truly awesome.
And I've had a pretty long life at this point, really.
Wow.
And it was just, I don't know. It was like being in seventh heaven. Well, I'm a cyclist, first of all. So I love the cycling. I'm from, that area, from northwestern Illinois near Iowa. And I grew up on a farm. And so, on a working farm with hogs and cattle and, corn and soybeans. And so it was like being home, riding all these country roads, seeing the beautiful countryside, even smelling the hog farms was like, oh yeah, this is just taking me right back to my earlier days. And I think the most memorable part of it all is just sort of this high experience of this rolling cycling festival, just hour after hour, town after town. And the way the little towns, put out the high hog for us, and rolled out the red carpet every time. You've got tens of thousands of cyclists descending on your little town all at once.
Yeah. And
they were just so happy to have us, and did everything to make it a very pleasant experience. And, while you were in their town. So, just the way, like when I was driving up to Ottumwa to join the race to begin with, or the ride, I came past I could tell that everybody had cut their grass and had their flowers looking beautiful, right? And they had flags flying, and some of them even had, welcome to Iowa RAGBRAI riders or something, signs. And I was like, oh, this is so wonderful, I could tell they were just so excited to have us all coming. So anyway.
And it's fun to hear, your perception of it, because it's, I get to, I'm lucky enough to be able to do RAGBRAI every year. And it's like you said, it's like a festival. And it's every day, all day. So
exactly,
if we pass through, let's say 7 communities, that's 7 festivals. And then you've got the overnight town, which always, throws the red carpet out for all of us. And then you've got teeny, we were talking about before we pushed record, being in, I believe it was Mediapolis. They had
it was Mediapolis. Yeah.
They had a coffee shop that we had talked about on a podcast about the coffee shops of RAGBRAI, and that town was so tiny, but they had like flags out, and they, you could tell that they had really spent some time making it look beautiful for us.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. And, I think, was it Mediapolis that had, one of them had like these, they had been growing them for weeks, obviously, these flowers that were like training up through these pieces of farm equipment and so forth, into these designs. And it was just beautiful. I was like, oh yeah, this is all about RAGBRAI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to know that all of these small towns, they're all, their RAGBRAI plans are done mostly by volunteers. So that's even more spectacular when you think of it.
It's amazing. I mean, I can see after having experienced it, why they love it. And, but I don't really think this is in my, Pollyanna opinion, but, it's not the commerce that it's bringing to them over a 5-hour period or whatever, because it's just such a short burst of commerce activity. But it's all about the whole experience, because all these, what I found was everybody's happy, right? I mean, we love cycling or we wouldn't be doing it. And, you're having a great time. You're talking to people, meeting new people. You're eating all this great food, and you feel like you can eat as much as you want because you're just like riding it all off. So that's so great too, And then, I don't know. I love cycling. I find it gives me a high anyway, and to do it in such a wonderful environment. Yeah, it was just really great.
Yeah. And so obviously you enjoyed it, but what made you decide that this was the year that you were going to pull the trigger and come to Iowa?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Because there must have been something, right?
Yeah.
So I am single. I'm divorced for the last 10 or 15 years now almost. And I was on a dating site actually in early June and met a guy who was originally from Iowa, now living in Wisconsin. And he and I started talking about cycling. I think that's sort of how we connected because we were both big cyclists. And I had said something about, well, he lives way up in Wisconsin. I live in St. Louis. It's too far for a relationship, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, no. I go all over the Midwest cycling, I come to St. Louis often. It's not a big deal. I was like, oh, okay. So we did meet up like a week or two later, and we enjoyed each other's company, and we talked and walked a lot. And then within 2 days of us meeting, he was emailing me or texting me. I don't remember which it was. Texting, I think, saying, I told you all about RAGBRAI and how great it is, and you know all about Iowa, and you know about RAGBRAI. He goes, I've ridden it the last 4 years. I'm going to ride it again. I'm all signed up, and I think that you ought to come and he said, get your feet wet. Just ride. He goes, ride a couple of days with me. I know that you have to like work in the middle of that week or whatever. It's like, oh, no. I already say this about I'm not going to carry all my gear and all that stuff. And he's like, no. It's not that rustic. He goes, we have charters. He goes, I sign up with the charter. They carry all my stuff, And I was like, oh, So anyway, he talked me into it. Sure enough, it really didn't take very long.
Yeah,
Go ahead, ask the question.
Well, I was just going to say, it probably didn't take a lot of, once you're like, wait a minute, this sounds pretty cool, and it's only a couple days, I'm going to do it.
Right. Well, over, I think, the course of the next week, he had convinced me. I was like, okay, I'll try. This is a great opportunity. He knows the ropes, right? He's already done it. It's only a couple of days. Even though the first day, of course, that I was going to ride was that Friday, which was the longest day,
Yeah, yeah.
the 85-mile day of the whole week. But I'm a pretty big cyclist, ride a lot, and I had just stepped up my training a bit by the time I did it. It was no problem. But I was like, oh, starting right out at 85 miles? I don't know. But anyway, I did it. And yeah, I loved it. So I was even though he and I are not together any longer, I would just say that I'll be forever grateful to him for introducing me to RAGBRAI.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And how would you describe like the days that you rode? I mean, you said, 85 miles, which is a long ways.
Yeah.
But, seeing Iowa countryside and all the people, like, give us some idea of like what your days were like.
Yeah. Well, I just remember that first morning out of Ottumwa, we started off pretty early. I think we were on the road by like 5:30 or 5:45.
Mm-hmm.
And, so the sun was just coming up and there was a little bit of mist hanging over the fields and the roads. And it was just so gorgeous, and all these cyclists that you could see forever up ahead of you and behind you. And I was just like, wow, this is like such a moving experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally moving and, emotionally moving from the very beginning. I was hooked already. I think within like, a few miles of Ottumwa, I was like, oh, this is so wonderful. And then, we stopped in the first little town and we hadn't had breakfast really. So we ate something there. And, was that Eldon? I can't remember. Was Eldon the first town? Anyway, we eventually were in Eldon. I know because we got separated in Eldon, and we were going to go to Grant Wood's, famous.
Oh yeah, the American Gothic House. Yeah,
the American Gothic House, right? And in Eldon they had all of those. Did you see all those cutouts of the American Gothic painting that they had set up in their park there?
Yes. Yeah.
So you poke your head in, So we did every single one of those and got photos taken of us when we eventually met up. We hadn't worked out a plan in advance. This is one thing I would say to everyone who's starting out with RAGBRAI. If you're riding with someone, always have a plan for where you're going to meet, because a lot of times your cell phones don't work very well.
Right.
Because so many people are on the network at that time and so forth. And so he was like somewhere else in town and I was somewhere, and eventually we connected by text messaging, but it was a while.
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have a plan eventually we had a plan that if we get separated, we'll always meet at the porta potties,
Yeah.
something like that.
Because every town has, like almost every town has a fire station or the porta potty line or,
right.
Wherever the music's playing, like all that good stuff.
Exactly. And, there was a DJ there. And so the DJ, he eventually said, I'm standing right by the DJ. Can you see me? And so that's how I found him. And we were able to connect back up then. So anyway, yeah, I just thought it was all, each little town was a wonderful experience, and riding the country roads and the hills. Actually, I had started training with more hill riding because I don't usually ride a lot of hills, and I just rode the same hills over and over again. And the hills were no problem for me. So, yeah.
The nice thing about Iowa hills, I think everyone knows that there are no mountains in Iowa. But the rolling hills, like you can, you might have to climb a little bit, but then you always get rewarded with a nice downhill where you can coast or go faster.
Right. Well, that's what he had said when I said, oh my gosh, there's quite a bit of climb on this day too. I think there were 3,100 feet maybe or something.
Okay. Yeah.
On that day. And I was like, really? I'm going to ride 85 miles and climb 3,100 feet? He goes, now wait, let me tell you about the climb. He goes, you go up a hill, you go down a hill. You go up a hill, you go down a hill. He goes, it's not like you're just climbing and climbing and climbing. I'm like, oh, okay. And that's really how it was. I remember there was one really long climb later in the day on that day. I don't even remember what town we were headed for at that point. And I was, I'd been riding for 8 or 9 hours by then. And that one was the only one where I was like, oh, wow, this is starting to get a bit, grueling. But I never got off my bike. I always rode all the hills. So I made it.
That's awesome.
We will be right back.
Stay cozy this fall with our LII Waffle Knit. In development for over a year by our merchandise team. This shirt is waffly good in design, comfort, and performance.
Made from soft and lightweight waffle knit fabric, this shirt can be used as a thermal base layer or your go-to casual shirt of the season.
This is the official Just Go Bike merchandise pick of the season.
Now, back to the show.
And will you tell the listeners how, like, when you and I got to meet one day and it turned into like a pretty fun situation?
Right. So I listened to a lot of Just Go Bike podcasts in preparation for RAGBRAI. I thought they were really informative, really helpful, by the way, to get me prepared and know what was coming and how much to train and, and also the great coffee shops. I really love that podcast.
Yeah, we're going to do that episode every year. We got enough people told us we had to do it every year.
Yeah, I really like that. So anyway, that day we were in Libertyville, actually, and we were taking a morning break in Libertyville. I think I was just getting one of those fresh shaken lemonades. It was really delicious. And we were sitting on a picnic table, and the guy I was riding with, and I had seen you walking around with your morphology shirt on. But it wasn't clicking with me. But then he said, "Oh, I bet that's Kathy Murphy over there." And I was like, "Oh, I bet it is." So I jumped off the table and I ran over to you. And I said, "Oh, you must be Murph." And you said, "Yeah, I am." And I said, "Oh, I love your podcast, your Just Go Bike. It was so helpful to me." Anyway, I was jabbering away at you. And you were so friendly and nice. And then you said something like, "Well, I'm sure I know AP's around here somewhere, but I'm not sure where she is right now." I was like, "Oh, I would love to meet her too." And then I think the guy I was with came over too. And then sure enough, AP showed up.
Yeah, she just popped up out of nowhere. It was crazy.
Right. So then we took pictures, all four of us. Yeah. So I sent you one of those pictures.
Yeah. And as soon as I saw the picture, I'm like, oh, yes, I remember that situation. It was pretty cool, though.
It was fun. I was so glad because I kind of wanted to go like in Ottumwa and Mount Pleasant. I kind of wanted to go to where you guys were set up in the evening, but we were like so eat and shower, set up our tents and all that stuff. So anyway,
yeah,
we didn't ever make it over to your booth, but I was so glad to run into you.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about, after the ride is, AP drives, I ride my bike. So then, I've got to go figure out a shower and then come back. And so we don't spend a ton of time at the booth. So it would be sad if you guys made all the effort and then we weren't actually there. But
so you might not have been there anyway, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And then we're all, we're always walking around. Then of course we got to go check out the band and we got to eat. And so it's just, it's a busy day. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yep. I was happy to run into you.
Yeah. I think it's awesome. Right. Yeah. Before we go, is there any cool stories or people you met, Iowa nice examples that maybe you want to share?
Gosh, I just think that there are so many. I did meet in addition to all the lovely little towns and how they roll out the red carpets, they do those pop-up things like in between, right? Where there's beer stations or there's, Mr. Porkchop Jr. sets up just out in the middle of nowhere, with the pink bus and everything. So at one of those stops, I think we stopped to use the porta potties, actually. I met a guy and his daughters who were from Burlington, and they were riding RAGBRAI. And I guess I was just standing there. I was watching this other crew come up that had one of those huge stereo speakers on the back of his bike. And they were riding, I'm sure you saw this crew, they were riding and wearing black and red tutus. The whole crew, they all had, ballerina tutus on. And so, and just other crazy stuff. So I stopped to talk to them and I was like, I thought it was really crazy that you guys were toting around these huge speakers and blaring music. I said, but you know what? Sometimes that really helps me get up
those hills.
Right. When you're beside me, if I don't have my own headphones in, I'm like, yeah. He goes, oh, yeah, I always carry this giant speaker, And so then this other guy from Burlington comes up and starts talking to me and, is asking me all about, I had my Trek Bicycle Tours jersey of where I had ridden earlier in the summer, and it had maps all over the front of it of where we had ridden in California. And so anyway, he and his daughters were commenting on that. And, and then I found out he's from Burlington. And then I started talking to him about Sturzing potato chips because I love Sturzing potato chips. Anyway, it was just, those were just typical examples. And then when I was at another stop, I don't think it was Mr. Porkchop Jr. It was another sort of a porta potty beer stop the next morning. That's what it was. As we headed from Mount Pleasant to Burlington, out in the middle of nowhere. It's only like 8:00 in the morning, and all these people are stopping and drinking beer. And I was just like, wow, what is this about? I don't understand. I couldn't do that, but they were. And I was just sitting there waiting for my partner. He was in line for porta potty. And sure enough, out of the crowds comes this guy from Burlington and his daughters again.
Oh, wow.
He goes, there he is. There's the woman, who we talked to yesterday. So anyway,
yeah,
it was just examples like that over and over again. It was so nice. And yeah, we connected up and said maybe we'd stay in touch and stuff. It was just fun.
Yeah. And the best part is if you come back and do RAGBRAI again, chances are high that you will run into that man and his daughters. It's just the way RAGBRAI works. It's crazy.
I know, it is amazing. Yeah, it is. Out of all those people, how do you keep running into the same people?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So I guess that's my last question for you. Do you think you'll come back and do RAGBRAI again?
I would love to do RAGBRAI again.
Yeah.
I have to think about all the particulars and, how it's going to work into my summer and, who I'm going to be with and who else will ride with me and so forth, But yeah, I would really love to do it again. So I hope so.
All right. Well, anybody out there listening who's in the St. Louis area, right? Maybe you can start up a team.
That's what my daughter suggested. She goes, I think you need to put like a little RAGBRAI girls group together, Mom.
Yeah, there you go.
Or something. I said, well, maybe so. We'll see.
Anyway, that's awesome.
I'm trying to talk my current partner, who's also a cyclist, into it. He has a lot of other things. He's a professional golfer, so
oh wow,
it's kind of right. It's right in the middle of his golf season.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably bad timing.
It's probably be hard for him, but he would love to do it too. So we'll see. I don't know.
All right, we're gonna cross our fingers that we see you again, Diana.
Well, Murph, it's been so great to talk to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your stories.
Well, listeners, that is it for today. We want to thank you for tuning in to listen to the Just Go Bike podcast. If you would like to contact Murph and AP with a comment about the podcast, or maybe even you have a topic in mind, you can reach us at justgobikepodcast@gmail.com. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook and watch our intros on YouTube. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, especially if you're a fan. That is going to do it for this week. Until next time,
just go bike!
Theme song by Ryan Steer, logo by Suzanne Milosevic, produced by Kathy Murphy, social media by Andrea Parrott, intro by Pumpkin. Until next time, just go bike.